Okay, so the question has to do with the age of the earth and where the dinosaurs fit in, and in particular how to answer a young person who's probably enthralled with the idea of dinosaurs and all that sort of thing. And again, this is a really complex question that I can't answer in 8 or 10 minutes, and we can take follow-up questions. But really, at the heart of your question is, what do Christians believe about this? What does the Bible teach about this? And the answer really is that the Bible doesn't teach very explicitly on the issue of dinosaurs or even how old creation is. It has become popular in recent years among some Christian circles to say that the Bible does teach explicitly about those things. But that's not the historic Christian understanding. So really throughout the church age, the historical understanding among Christians has been that on the issue of when creation occurred, we would have to wait until natural philosophers, what we today would call scientists, could weigh in on that issue, that Scripture doesn't teach on that issue. Now, the first people to read their Bible and come to the conclusion that they could ascertain a date for the creation were not until the 17th century, and that was a couple of Englishmen. Originally, James Ussher and then John Lightfoot, and the two of them went back and forth and came up with a date for creation of 4004 BC. And the impetus for doing that was not that they were great Hebrew scholars or that they understood the culture in which Genesis was written better than previous generations of Christians. It was that they lived in a time when the Bible was published in English for the first time. And so reading in English without an understanding of the underlying Hebrew or the Jewish culture to which Moses wrote Genesis, they made a number of assumptions, each of which is at best dubious and at worst demonstrably false, that led them to dating the creation 6,000 years ago. Since that time, abundant evidence has come to light, both scriptural, digging into Scripture a little more in depth, and then from science to show that interpretation, that theory about what Scripture teaches is wrong. And yet, today it's become very popular in a small sector of Christianity, and that is evangelicalism. And the way that came about historically was because of the teaching of Darwinism and the rise of Darwinism and the teaching of it in schools. There was a group of Christians who said, no, we've got to fight this atheistic science. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to dig our heels in at Ussher and Lightfoot's date, that interpretation, and say that evolution doesn't have enough time. Now the fact is, and this is another thing I'd take weeks and weeks to teach in a class at the Kilns, the fact is that evolution fails in terms of evidence, regardless of the time involved. But that choice of making the 6,000-year date orthodoxy, a very recent choice in Christian history, led to the birth of a number of creation science organizations, so-called, who filter all of the available science evidence through a very narrow interpretation. And that's a very vocal set of organizations. You can hear them on the Christian radio station here in Bend, promoting the idea that the earth is 6,000 years old, the universe is 6,000 years old, dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time. And just to wrap up this section of the answer, that's not what the Bible teaches. That's a very recent interpretation of what the Bible teaches. And I'm actually, as I have studied this for the past 20 years, I'm aware of at least 14 different interpretations of Genesis 1 that are held or have been held by Christians who believe in the inerrancy and authority and even inspiration, authority, and even inerrancy of Scripture. And only 2 of those 14 arrive at the conclusion that the earth is young like that. So as your young people come to understand about the existence of dinosaurs and things like that, the real answer is they're not mentioned in Scripture because the people to whom Scripture was written would have had no clue what was being talked about. It's really only within the past 200 years that the fossil evidence for such things as dinosaurs has ever come to light. And so why would God put into Scriptures that were originally intended for Hebrew people living 3,500 years ago, and every subsequent generation of believers until about 150 years ago. So that's why dinosaurs aren't mentioned in Scripture.